What's up, guys? This is part two of our Roosevelt and the Second New Deal video. We're looking at the second half of his New Deal. And if you remember that we're looking at the three R's: relief, reform, recovery. They are still going on in the Second New Deal. However, Roosevelt shifts his focus from relief and focuses more on recovery. There are those aspects of reform. Mainly, the big reform programs are things like the SEC and the banking reforms like Glass-Steagall. But we do see a shift from relief to recovery during the second New. Now, when we talk about the reason for the second set of New Deal is that there was a lot of frustration from the American people over the first New Deal. The essentially the promise was that the programs would be able to alleviate the problems and that we would be able to get out of this financial strain that we're in. But it wasn't happening. We're still having lots of unemployment, lots of economic problems, and a lot of people were going frustrated over the status of the Depression, which led FDR to shifting his approach in his economic programs from just relief to reform and recovery in 1935. Now, the challenges to FDR, it's important to note, as we highlighted in the first video, that there were a lot of opponents from both the far right and far left that indicated that despite popular teachings in the social studies sphere, FDR was not completely loved by everybody. He didn't walk on water in regards to his programs and his policies. There were those that opposed his ideals, which is part of the reason why he initiated the series of programs for the Second New Deal, because a lot of those challenges were starting to get a lot more public opinion and public positive opinion in regards to Dr. Townsend and his policy, which eventually led to Social Security along with the share our wealth. Now, the second New Deal, the big part of it is the WPA. We addressed this earlier with the first New Deal. It did actually transfer over into the second as well, and it was really part of the trying to get Americans jobs, not just again hand out doles, but to give them actual jobs, to pay the bills, to really help men still feel like they're providing for their families. And it's important to note that the WPA created a lot of different temporary projects. They did building projects, they did murals and artwork, they did music, a whole bunch of different programs to encompass a whole lot of different fields. Now, the WPA helped, but never really employed enough people to stimulate an extreme purchasing power. We talked about in class the idea of priming the pump. The idea of the New Deal at first was to just kind of get things started, and then the economy would kind of fix itself, much like you'd prime a pump and then wait for the water to flow through on its own. Right here, we have an example of one of the WPA work projects where they're actually digging for some irrigation. There's other projects like you might see in the background where they're working on actual buildings and structures. There's also a number of programs that worked on wall side murals, working on cleaning up the highways and fixing those, working on laying down new highways, those sorts of projects. All right, now the Social Security Act is a big thing to note from the New Deal. It's still around today. It does have its detractors, but we're not going to be focusing on that. More so, we're just going to focus on the historical evidence and really the historical facts from Social Security. It was first founded in 1935, and it was the first U.S. welfare program for the aged, the disabled, and the unemployed. The age-old pensions were funded by employers and workers, which is why, for those of you that have jobs, you'll see that there's a Social Security tax that comes out of your paycheck. And remember, this is a concept that is first brought about by Dr. Townsend, that pensions for the elderly. It does expand and evolve to what we have with the Social Security Act now. Now, there were, as I said before, those critics on the far left and far right, just to really boiled down their arguments, the liberals, the far left, argued that Social Security really didn't do enough, and not just Social Security, but that the New Deal itself didn't do enough. That's why people like Huey Long got a lot of public attention from those that agreed with the far left stance, because they felt that the New Deal should do more to help Americans. The conservative, or the far right, argued that Social Security violated individualism and self reliance. And that was an argument that was used also to counter the New Deal and to oppose some of the programs. A lot of those on the far right felt that government was overstepping its bounds. Now, it's important to note, especially when we talk about the AP exam, that Social Security was the first welfare program that was set to help individuals by the American government. As far as labor legislations, you have the Wagner Act, created by the National Labor Relations Board to oversee labor management affairs, and the Fair Labor Standards Act. Now, essentially, the Wagner Act was used heavily to help mandate management to negotiate with unions. So essentially, it goes back to that broker state that the textbook talks about, where the government kind of forces itself to be a mediator between unions and laborers. Unions and big boss owners, I should say. The Fair Labor Standards Act created the first minimum wage and maximum hour laws. So much like we'd have today, where there's a federal minimum wage as well as hours that you're allowed to work legally, the Fair Labor Standards Act is the first that started that across the boards. The Wagner Act is considered the Magna Carta for labor, but that's more of a minor nickname, not something you'd really need to know for the AP exam. Now, the work week for maximum was 40 hours. You did get 40 cents per hour. That has increased, obviously, over the years. However, 40 hours is still considered the full time to guarantee different government uh, policies, like you need to work 40 hours to be able to get health benefits, which is why a lot of businesses really hire only part-time workers now, just to try to avoid some of those costs. The New Deal was made up of three parts, as we said before: relief, reform, recovery. And this is a big thing to think about when we talk about the legacies of the New Deal, when we talk about the lasting effect that it would have on America. Now, the New Deal was not, or sorry, was most successful in providing immediate relief to ease some of the economic suffering, although it did not solve the problem expressly. We didn't get out of the Great Depression specifically because of the New Deal programs. There was an element of recovery, but it wasn't a complete recovery in regards to solving the problem. And it did bring about major reforms that helped change America. When we think about things like Social Security, when we think about the SEC, which is still around today, when we think about minimum wage laws and minimum hours laws that are still around today, we wouldn't have those without the New Deal, or at least we wouldn't have them as soon as we did without FDR signing those executive orders and getting those programs needed, or getting those programs through. So, for the first time, it's also important to note that the government used Keynesian economics, which essentially is moving away from just trying to balance the budget and moving towards deficit spending. That the government can help stimulate the economy by expressly spending and purposefully going into debt. It's also important to notice that the government assumed responsibility for the health of the nation's economy. Gone are the days of let business run business. Now it's what should the government do to help business. And lastly, the New Deal it signaled the beginning of the welfare state. A lot of people use or see this as a negative note, but it is important to note that welfare comes about because of the programs in the New Deal. So this is the final notes for you guys on the New Deal and the Great Depression. We will be talking about the next chapter in class tomorrow, which is World War II, specifically our entrance into it, or what leads us to entering World War II. But it should be noted, when we talk about the Great Depression, what really brought us out of it was a combination of the New Deal and its programs to get us in a more stable area. But the final nail, I guess you could say, in the coffin of the Great Depression was World War II, because of the increase in manufacturing and production needed to be able to fight that war. We'll talk about that again in the next video. We'll see you guys later.